I'd like to welcome everyone. We are doing an interview here with New York Times bestselling author Christine Feehan. Christine has been a #1 New York Times bestseller several times over. She's written more than 70 books. You're a very busy lady. And each of the series has hit the bestseller list at some point, so that's pretty phenomenal. She lives here in beautiful Northern California. We're actually here in her tea garden, which is lovely. She's surrounded by grandchildren, her children, and her dogs. The book club was given a shadow game to read, the first in the Ghostwalker series. So we'll be answering some questions about that book, about the Ghostwalkers in general, craft, about being an author, and some other fun things that the book club has sent questions about. So let's go ahead and get started if you're ready.
Well, I just want to clarify one thing here. They try to make me sound cool by saying all of that stuff about me, but we're in my tea garden for a reason. There is a huge wall around us for a reason, and running water for a reason. Up in that house, there are grandchildren playing in every room. There are dogs barking. There was no place we could have an interview where there wasn't something going on. And it didn't seem very cool. So we're out here trying to look cool, but I'm not.
So we're going to start with, I believe it's Kirby Smith, asks, where did the idea of Ghostwalkers come from?
Generally, when I have an idea for a series, an entire series, it's because I've read an article somewhere that fired my imagination. And I read about experiments that were done during the Vietnam era and then also in Russia. And I loved the idea of taking that a step further and using it for heroes and heroines. I also wanted to write a book, the Born Identity, the actual book, not the movie. The book had a huge impact on me. It was a beautiful love story. The hero and the heroine had to work together for survival. And I really loved that both of them were equal partners, and I wanted to find a way to do that. And I chose the Ghostwalkers. I also wanted to honor military personnel, men and women who serve our country, because I feel like they are heroes. So that's where the whole idea came from.
So Dana Baker asks, how did she come up with the experiment on the little girls and the soldiers? Said, what made you decide to make Lily an orphan with superhuman powers?
Well, all of the girls that Dr. Whitney, found in the orphanages had some psychic ability. His psychic ability is his ability to see that even when they're infants. And he doesn't, women to him are inferior. Orphans were throwaway children that he did not believe would ever impact society. And for him, he felt really that this was a gift to them, that they would be useful by him conducting these experiments. And then once he perfected them, only when they were perfected, would he use them on soldiers that would then defend our country.
Linda Gordon is an interest in psychic ability. What inspired you to create this series? And do you believe that some people are more sensitive to psychic abilities? P.S. She wants you to know I'm enjoying Shadow Game, my first Christine Feehan book, and I'm hoping to have it finished before book club. So this is Linda's first Feehan book.
Well, thank you, Linda, for taking a chance on me. I really do hope you enjoy the series. I really love writing the Ghostwalkers. And yes, I've always had an interest in psychic ability. My children will tell you I'm psychic, and I always know when they're up to something very bad. They're not that hard to read. But I do think that most people have some sensitivity, and it's always intrigued me, and I've read a tremendous amount of articles about it and experiments on it. in all countries from around the world. And that's something else that I find interesting, is that almost all the countries have tried in some ways to do some experiments with limited success on it.
Robin Sneed asks, which characters do you identify with in Shadow Game?
That's an interesting question. Shadow Game was my very first in this series, and I was trying to blend real science, with an action book, and have it be romantic. And I was very that's a hard one. I don't know that I did identify with them so much as I became them when I was writing it, because I wanted to feel each role that I was writing at the time. It was really important to me to get the feel for this series completely different than any other series that I have written. And so I was really immersed in the characters themselves, not just the entire story. So yeah, with this first one, it would be a little hard to say it was Lily or it was Ryland, or it was the evil Dr. Whitney, because at the time you didn't realize he was evil. You have to remember that you thought he was the good guy.
Carmel Allen says, I love the closeness of the Ghostwalkers and Lily and her sisters. Which series do you like writing the best?
I get asked that question a lot. If you read all of my series, you will notice they're all about family. I have 10 sisters and 3 brothers. I have 7 daughters. I have tons and tons of nieces and nephews. My family's enormous. We're very, very close to one another. And everything is about women's issues and family. So it's hard for me to identify one particular series and say I love it more. When I'm writing the book, that is my favorite book during the time that I'm writing it. But I have to switch up series because my kids would tell you crazy. Like, I know I'm not, but I do hear voices in my head saying, write me right now. And so I have to do it. And it usually moves from world to world. And I think it does that in order for me to take a breath, get out of that world, not be bored with it. Because if I was writing 6 books in one series, year after year, it would make me nuts. I mean, I would be so bored. So, yeah, that's hard.
Lynn Hill would like to know if you have any psychic ability.
No. No. I mean, I have mother sense, which I'm sure most mothers do. Like, I know when one of my children's in trouble. I could tell you immediately before the phone rings. I'm already getting that, oh my God, something's wrong. So whether it's I call it mother sense more than anything else. But I knew with my mom and my sisters, and I know things sometimes, but it's always with someone that I'm very, I love very, very much, and I'm very close to. And all of a sudden I think, oh God, something's wrong, and the phone will ring. So, yeah.
So, Amy Ikari says, I have been a fan of Miss Feehan's Dark series for more than 10 years. I just started the Shadow Rider series. I have read many of her Ghostwalker books. I really like their creed. I like Lily and her devotion to finding her sisters. She thanks both you and Brenda, she said, for the great books that you write. Says, I'll always remember discovering Dark Prince at Borders and stumbling upon Whiskey Creek series at Barnes & Noble. Her question is, which member of the Ghost Walkers was most difficult to write about?
The most difficult for me was probably Caden. I had a really hard time with him because he was extremely, okay, this sounds crazy coming from me, but he was extremely dark. And I was, he kind of bordered right on that. Is he going to be a good guy or is he going to be a bad guy? And um, he tipped the scales into good, but I knew he had this very dark place in him, and I kept hoping that it wouldn't go too far into that. So he probably was my most difficult. He also was someone that I loved very much. And I think I always really like those guys who it's very difficult to maybe redeem them from some of the things that they did.
So we have a few craft questions. Jeanette Plummer says, how does she go about putting her books together? Does she plot it out or let the characters help determine what's next?
I will be very honest. If I plotted my books out, it would be the biggest waste of time ever. If I tell my editor the book is going to go this certain way, I can guarantee you I have to call her and say the book just went south. Once the characters are alive and breathing, they completely take over the entire book. I don't write it from that point on. They tell the story, and they're moving through there and taking turns that are so unexpected. I'm like, oh my God, what do I do now? You just painted yourself into a corner. And sometimes guys say the stupidest things, and then you're like, how do I redeem you? You just were an idiot. So yeah, it's always the characters. For me, it's always the characters.
Lori Green asks, when you wrote your first book and submitted it, did it get rejected? I know you hate answering this.
I do hate answering this.
But it's a good story.
Okay, I'm embarrassed to talk about this because I've been writing books since I could put together words, like on a piece of paper. They were horrible stories, but it didn't matter to me. I had to write them. And I was probably, 3 when I first started making my mother listen to me, and I would try to write them down. And so I wrote every day of my life. And when I was a martial arts instructor, which I loved doing, I was in martial arts for, over 25 years, almost 27 years. And I was forced into retirement due to health. And I still had 3 children at home, and that means, all of us know, one has to support those little darlings, especially if they are boys and they eat. So my friend said, oh, send your book in. And I said, are you crazy? And she's like, no, send it in. So to keep her quiet, I did. And of course, it was going to be rejected. I'd never heard of RWA. I didn't know anything about publishing, nothing. I get a call, we would like to buy your book. And I hung up the phone. I so am not kidding you. I put that little puppy right down and went, oh my God. I don't know if I want to sell my books. They're my babies. People are going to be mean to them. So yeah, it was not my finest moment. And believe me, there were a lot worse moments after that, but we're not going to tell you that because it's an even worse story. So that first one that I sent in, which was Dark Prince, did not get rejected.
Thank you, Lori. I love when she has to tell that story. So Alyssa Stacy, she asks, what do you do if you get writer's block?
I don't get writer's block. I believe that when I can't move the book forward, it's because I have intruded into the book. As a writer, I think that somehow, instead of my characters saying or doing what they would do, I somehow gave them what I felt or what I would do. So I go back and I reread, and most times, almost immediately, I can see where I intruded into the book instead of my characters. Your characters have to be alive. You have to know everything about them, even things that you're not going to tell your readers. You have to know what happened to them when they were young, what shaped their life, so that it makes sense when they do something, when they react to something that's going on in your book. And so if you do something out of character for them and you don't know what that is, you don't know your character very well. You have to go back and really review your character's life and say, what would he or she do in this situation? That's very important. And most of the time, that's going to resolve your situation.
So Virgie, it's Virgie or Virgie, hope I'm getting one of those right. Lane asks, what was your first book and how long have you been writing? I know you just answered it's Dark Prince, but why don't you tell us how long you've been writing?
I'm not kidding. I've been writing since I was a little child. I had hundreds and hundreds of notebooks and stories, and they were under beds and in closets and everywhere. And they were the worst stories on the face of the earth, I'm pretty sure. But I thought they were brilliant, and I made my family read every one of them because I'm that cool. Not. But I would be horrified if one of those stories got out. And let me tell you, my sisters like to blackmail me.
Linda Myers asks, how long does it take to write a book, and what's your downtime between books?
Oh, that's not a nice thing to ask me, Linda. I write a book anywhere from 2 to 3 months. In 2 to 3 months, I try to write between 10 and 20 pages a day. I don't always do it. Sometimes I do it religiously, the 20 pages. But those books have been researched well in advance. I have all the research done as a rule. And the way I write, there's no interruptions, not the phone, not the kid, nobody interrupts me during the time I'm writing. And I'll write for an hour and a half, and then I take a short break and I go back, and I do that throughout the day. I treat it as a business. So just as you would have an 8-hour job, I treat it as a job, and I sit down and I work. And that's extremely important to me. I turn the book in, and after I've edited it a couple times, and then I turn it in, and the next morning I start the next book. That's true.
So you just mentioned a little bit about research. Janet asks, how does she do the research for her books and also for ideas?
I never have to worry about ideas. I have a billion ideas in my head at all times, and it's a hard thing to keep pushing them back to make them like line up and wait their turn. The research, I love research, and this got me in trouble for a lot of years. I would get so fixated on the research and go deeper and deeper and deeper, when in fact I'm only going to use a few lines. I do, and the ghost walkers, I have to know what I'm talking about, and that's, you're getting into science, and I'm not Miss Rocket Science, I'm going to tell you that up front. So I have to have primary sources, and they have to be able to explain to me what everything is, what, in the case of the book, I'm working on a book called Covert Game, and she's working on artificial intelligence, a program for artificial intelligence, and I had to speak to a professor, and he co-wrote the first book on artificial intelligence. Gosh, he gives me the profession, you know, like the red mark through everything, and Christine, I'm not sure you're getting this, let's try it again, which makes you feel like you're back in school. But it's fascinating to me. All this research is fascinating to me. If it's something that one has to find out about where you're going to get your computer flagged, I make Domini do it. Because that's happened before. And, you know, but they know I'm a writer now, but still, you're going to, you know, there's certain things that you do research on, and I have to know them. I have to make sure that I'm doing it right. Most of it is primary sources, checking with them, especially with the Ghostwalker series, and really good research that my assistant does for me. And then I just tell her what I need, and she does all the articles that I have to run through and pick out, and then I go to my primary source, and that's how I do it.
So you're saying that if you have to research something that could get you in trouble with the government, you give that to Domini. I just wanted to clarify that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, this is says it's from Troy and Linda. Did you ever have any struggles with character or plot?
Oh, of course. You can't write as many books as I have where I haven't struggled with a book or a character. And some of the time, it's the content, you know, a hot button. I mean, I have a past, just like any other woman. Terrible things have happened to me. You know, the assault rate for women in our country is, you know, pretty much 1 out of 3. So you can look around a room and know that a good portion of those women have been assaulted in some way. And I like to do women's issues. I worked with teens that were molested or physically abused. I want to give them happy endings. You write about the things that you know, and so some of those subjects are extremely difficult for me, and everybody reacts differently to an assault. I actually find it very distressing when I get mail that's really rude, where people assume that, you know, they're the only one that's ever been assaulted. And because they react differently than the character in my book. But the world is made up of, you know, millions of different personalities, and everybody reacts to things differently. So you handle things the best way that you can in the limited space that you have, but it really affects the writer emotionally when he or she is writing about subjects that touch on their lives as well. So those can be very emotional and very, very difficult to write. But I think it's often necessary because I feel like people need happy endings. I really do. I feel like people need to know that there is love for everybody, no matter how horrible your life has been. There's hope. And that's what writers who write in the fiction genre, romance fiction, you try to give hope to people. You try to make them feel like whatever is going on in their life, there's hope out there, and there's other people who have had these things happen. So yeah, it can be very emotional.
Sheila asks, why did you decide to write paranormal romance?
Very selfish. In today's world, everyone has to be politically correct. I mean, you have to watch every word you say. Oh my God, don't make a mistake, or I don't know what they're going to call you. Something horrible, that's for sure. And a guy has to be androgynous. I mean, he can't be a man. He has to be this perfect human being who always says and does the right thing. And a woman, you know, I mean, I get asked the question all the time, I'm a feminist, and therefore, why are you demeaning us by having sex in your book? Well, you know, women shouldn't read romance. Why? Are we so stupid we don't know it's fiction? I'm sorry, don't tell me I'm a stupid woman. I'm not. I'm actually quite intelligent. I don't like any of that. By having a touch of paranormal, and I try to put mostly a touch in most of my books, I get away with having a not politically correct hero. And I love that. My women can be anything. They can be someone who wants to stay home and have the man take care of them, or they can be a badass out there kicking butt. They can have the highest paying job in the world. They can do anything they want to do, and it's okay. And they can have any kind of sex they want, and it's okay. That's why I like to write paranormal. I get away with it.
Courtney Tanisi asks, does it get monotonous or hard continuing a series like your Carpathians? She says not that she's complaining.
Because I write so many different series, no. I love the different worlds I create, and I love to go back to them. If I'm writing 3 or 4 books in between each time I write a book in that series, then no, it doesn't. What it does do is it gets hard to write a new and fresh feeling story, and I change it up. And then a lot of people read a series because it's comforting to them, and they want the same story told over and over and over. They will have a favorite character that they want to see in the story over and over and over. I can't do that. I have to have a fresh feel for me to enjoy writing it. And that's where I think not it gets monotonous, because I won't do it. But it would if I constantly used the same characters and if I constantly had the same sort of thing going on all the time. But I change it up. So nobody ever knows what's going to happen in my books, because I have this long, huge thing that I already know is going to happen, and getting there is going to take a while. So no, I like it.
So Rita and Deborah have kind of similar questions I'm going to combine here just to save some time. They're wondering, how do you get ideas for your characters and how do you name them?
I can't write a book if I don't have the right name for my character, which is why sometimes there's the same name. A character will come to me and he has one name, and then in 2 or 3 books down the line, a similar character, or not the same character, but somebody else will show up with a name, and he won't answer to anything but that one name. So that happens, and it's disconcerting, but then I tell myself there's lots of people with the name Sheila or Christine in a story. In real life, so it can happen in a story. I find them everywhere. I go online and I look at names, I look in baby books, I read articles in magazines and newspapers. I listen to people shamelessly when I'm out in restaurants or something, and when I hear a really cool name, sometimes I'll even walk up and ask how they spell it. So that's, then I get the names come to me. That's how I do it. And as for, what was it, characters?
Yeah, where you get your ideas for your characters. You have a wide variety of characters.
The characters come to me in my head and they become real. Like they have a whole life unfolding, and of course no 2 lives are the same. So in my head, they're already this whole person from birth to wherever the story starts with their age. So yeah, I don't ever have a problem with that.
So Marge Ward asks, what influences you when you're writing a book? Do you see the whole story in your mind, or does it develop as you write?
It develops as I write. No, I'd be so bored if I knew the ending of my books. Sometimes there's a murder in a book and somebody will write to me and say, oh my God, I knew exactly who did it, which shocks me because I didn't know. And I'm thinking, wow, you're good.
Let's see. So this is from Maria. I'm going to say it's Negrin. It says, I'm in the middle of reading Shadow Game. I've read several of her books. It's always interesting to immerse yourself in one of the worlds she's created. My question would be about the Carpathians. I noticed that they don't have much use for modern technology, so it's hard to place them in a specific time period. There's no mention of a particular year that I can remember. So what year is it in the story in any of them?
Well, in the new stories that I'm writing now, it's present day, and I actually am addressing modern technology and their lack of it in the new guard coming up. It's Dark Crime, which was in an anthology. Do you remember the name of that anthology? Whatever it was. So
Edge of Darkness.
Edge of Darkness. So Dark Crime starts the new guard in the United States, and it's Dark Carousel, which comes out
The 25th of July.
25th of July, and in paperback. It did come out in hardcover before that, but that definitely is starting that whole, oh my gosh, modern technology needs to be addressed here. And Dark Legacy is coming out September, and that is a hardcover, and it really addresses the whole thing. And it's interesting that you asked that question, because it will be so answered for you.
Yeah, I think Maria might be a little psychic. That's what I think.
I didn't even think about that, but yes, Maria, you are psychic.
All right, so we have a few more questions. This is from Janet. How did you get started writing? Was it a lifelong dream, or did you stumble into it? I think you kind of answered that.
I think I have answered that. I have always written. It's almost a compulsion. I get very irritable if I can't write. I find myself, it's, other people have a drink after dinner, and they do different things. I always, to relax myself, would sit down and write. I love to read. I read almost everything. I can't not read. And so that was a big continuation. I wrote stories that I myself love to read. So I started very, very young and continued from there. I didn't think about publishing. I don't think most writers think, oh, I'm the best writer in the world, and so therefore I'm going to get published. I certainly was not one of those, if there are those that think that. So I didn't think I was good enough to be published, and that nobody would, other than me and my sisters who had to read them and say they were great. I never really thought anybody would read them. So yeah, I sort of stumbled into it.
Now, Lynn Brooks has a fantastic question. I'm looking forward to you answering this.
No.
It's actually really good. You're going to like it. It says, she's asking if there's any other genre that you've always wanted to write, but you've not taken the plunge and written in yet. And what genre would it be?
All right, so I did try not to publish. Okay, not to publish. Did you hear that, people? Don't ever ask for this book. I tried writing a Western, because I like to read Westerns. It's like one of my favorite things. And oh my God, I'm the worst in the world. There is nobody worse than me. Oh, I was so embarrassed. I'm like, this is so bad. It really was bad. And I still dream about that book. I dream about that story, but I can't write it. Oh, it's horrible. But I have written contemporary. I have. Unfortunately, like I said, my men are not, I don't think anybody would accept them and their actions in the contemporary world. Because, I just sort of like macho guys. I mean, what can I say? So, yeah, I'm old. We liked them that way.
Now, if anybody knows of any good Westerns, now's the time to comment.
Oh my God!
No, they should. If they can suggest some good Westerns.
Walk of shame. Walk of shame.
All right, Danielle Marsh. Her question is, what author? Do you have any authors that influenced you, and how did they influence you?
Okay. Again, this goes back to really old school. Jean Stratton Porter, I read when I was very young, and I found these books, and The Harvester it's very old-fashioned, but I loved the romance of it, And then, of course, Louise May Alcott, which was family and sisters, and how could you resist that? And I read every single one of hers. And Sherlock Holmes was my all-time fave, so I could actually quote lines from every one of his, Arthur Conan Doyle's books. So those early authors influenced me to want to write. But I read all the classics, so I have quite the education when it comes to stories, and all of those were a huge influence on me. The Dickens, the grit in his, I mean, seeing the streets of London through his eyes was amazing, you know. I wanted to be able to have people feel where they are in my books the way I could feel it when I read his. There were so many of the earlier authors. The ones now I read mainly, there's some that I call comfort reads, you know, that I fall back on because I know when I pick up that book I'm going to feel good. And then I get very excited. I discovered a couple years ago, Kristen Ashley, and fell madly in love with her books. Her characters. I think her characters just feel so, you know, real. I love that. And there's so many where for whatever reason, I fall in love with their work.
What's that Lisa Kleypas book you've read a million
Oh my
times now?
God. Marrying Mr. Winterbourne. Oh my gosh, Cold Hearted Rake and Marrying Mr. Winterbourne. I read her book, those two books, I don't know how many times. I can't tell you how many times. Like, I will go to bed and get out my iPad and I'm going to read another story and I find myself, where is Marrying Mr. Winterbourne? Lisa, wherever you are, those books were so good.
Norma, I'm going to say it's Sternbenz, asks, what was your favorite book as a child?
I will tell you the one that I read a million times, hands down, Little Women. I not only read that book myself a million times. When my grandmother was ill, I would go to the hospital every day and I would read it to her, and then I read it to all of my children. But the Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit was a huge influence on me.
Now, Lynn Condon asked about your next books, and we've already answered that. You have Dark Carousel coming out on the 25th of July, and Dark Legacies coming out September 5th.
Yes.
But Lynn Gothier, we have two Lynns, asks, what book are you working on now?
I am presently working on Covert Game, which is coming out next year, right?
Mm-hmm.
And oh my gosh, I will tell you the research on this one has been a killer. So hopefully you guys will all read it and love it and know I worked a lot on this one.
So that we've gotten to the end of all the questions. If you had anything else that you wanted to add?
I wanted to say thank you all for your wonderful questions, but mostly thank you so much, Brenda. I miss you terribly. I was looking forward to seeing you. I'm sorry that this happened. For everyone out there was a terrible tragedy in my family, and Brenda was gracious enough to let me do this video this way. We're all grieving here. I'm going to cry, so I'm going to stop. But Brenda, I love you, I miss you, and thank you for this opportunity.